The Thompson family had always dreamed of a quiet, peaceful life in the suburbs. After years of renting apartments and dealing with noisy neighbors, Mark and Sarah finally saved enough money to buy their own home. It wasn't just any house. It was a beautiful two-story cottage nestled in a neighborhood that looked like it belonged on a postcard. The streets were lined with tall trees, the lawns were perfectly trimmed, and every house seemed to shine under the afternoon sun. For Mark, a software engineer who spent most of his days coding behind a computer screen, this place felt like paradise. And for Sarah, a strong and capable woman who commanded naval base security, it was the perfect retreat from her high-pressure job. When they first moved in, everything seemed ideal. Their neighbors greeted them warmly, offering baked goods and friendly advice about local schools and grocery stores. The HOA even sent a welcome packet filled with colorful brochures about community events and guidelines for keeping the neighborhood pristine. At first glance, it all sounded reasonable: rules about lawn maintenance, holiday decorations, and noise levels. Nothing too extreme, or so they thought. But soon, cracks began to show in the picture-perfect facade. One weekend, Mark decided to put up a small garden flag outside their front door. It was a simple flag, no bigger than a dinner plate, featuring a painting of a lighthouse. To him, it was more than just decor. It was a tribute to his late father, who had loved sailing and often took young Mark to watch the ships come in. He didn't think much of it at the time, assuming such a tiny addition wouldn't raise any eyebrows. Boy, was he wrong. Within days, an envelope appeared in their mailbox. Inside was a letter from the HOA, written in formal language but dripping with passive-aggressive undertones. It stated that the garden flag violated Section 4.7b of the Aesthetic Guidelines, which prohibited any non-approved decorative items visible from the street. Confused, Mark showed the letter to Sarah, expecting her to laugh it off. Instead, she frowned, sensing trouble brewing. "This is just the beginning," she muttered, tossing the paper onto the kitchen counter. Sarah knew how organizations like this worked. In her line of duty, she'd seen plenty of power-hungry individuals misuse authority for petty reasons. Still, she hoped this would blow over if they simply ignored it. Unfortunately, ignoring it only made things worse. Over the next few weeks, more letters arrived, each one more aggressive than the last. Fines started piling up, first $50, then $100, and eventually escalating into the hundreds. Anonymous notes slipped under their door, accused them of ruining the neighborhood's beauty. At night, strange cars would slowly drive past their house, headlights lingering longer than necessary. Once, Sarah caught someone peeking over their fence, jotting down notes on a clipboard. When she confronted the person, they quickly scurried away without explanation. The once warm smiles from neighbors turned cold, replaced by awkward glances and whispered conversations whenever the Thompsons passed by. Mark tried to stay optimistic, telling himself it was just a phase. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. She'd dealt with bullies before, both as a child and later in her career, and recognized the signs. The HOA wasn't going to back down easily. Little did anyone know, Sarah wasn't the type to roll over either. What started as a minor disagreement over a harmless garden flag was about to spiral into a battle no one in the neighborhood could have anticipated. As the letters from the HOA kept coming, Mark and Sarah found themselves increasingly frustrated. Each envelope felt like a small bomb dropped into their otherwise peaceful lives. The tone of the messages grew harsher, shifting from polite reminders to outright demands. "Remove the flag immediately or face further consequences," one letter read. Another threatened legal action if they didn't comply within 48 hours. It was as if the HOA had declared war over a piece of fabric fluttering in the breeze. Mark tried to reason with them. He wrote back politely, explaining the sentimental value of the flag and how it honored his late father. He even offered to replace it with something less conspicuous, a smaller version, perhaps, or one that matched the approved color palette listed in the guidelines. But his attempts at compromise were met with silence. The HOA wasn't interested in negotiation. They wanted compliance, no questions asked. Sarah, on the other hand, decided to take matters into her own hands. She attended an HOA meeting, hoping to address the issue directly. Walking into the community center where the board held its sessions, she felt a mix of determination and unease. The room buzzed with chatter as homeowners discussed everything from landscaping rules to parking restrictions. When it was her turn to speak, Sarah stood up confidently, introducing herself and sharing her perspective. "I understand the importance of maintaining standards," she began, her voice calm but firm. "But this isn't just any decoration. It's a tribute to my husband's father. Surely there's room for compassion and flexibility here." Her words seemed reasonable enough, but instead of softening the board members, they only seemed to provoke them. One woman, seated at the head of the table, rolled her eyes dramatically. Another man muttered under his breath about people thinking they're special. A third chimed in, saying, "Rules are rules. If we make exceptions for you, we'll have to do it for everyone." Sarah clenched her fists under the table, forcing herself to stay composed. She knew better than to let emotions get the best of her. She'd dealt with far worse during her time in the military. Still, the dismissive attitude stung. These weren't just bureaucrats enforcing policies. They were neighbors, people who lived mere steps away from her home. And yet they acted as though she and Mark were invaders threatening the sanctity of their perfect little bubble. Things escalated quickly after that meeting. Late-night visits became a regular occurrence. Someone would knock on their door at odd hours, claiming to inspect their property for compliance. Once, Mark opened the door to find a flashlight shining directly in his face, blinding him momentarily. When he asked what was going on, the visitor, a man wearing a clipboard and a baseball cap, mumbled something about checking for unapproved modifications before leaving without another word. The intimidation didn't stop there. Anonymous complaints flooded in, accusing the Thompsons of all sorts of violations. According to the HOA, their mailbox leaned slightly to the left, a supposed safety hazard. Their porch light was too bright, disturbing wildlife, and their recycling bins weren't placed correctly on pickup days, disrupting neighborhood aesthetics. Every minor detail was scrutinized, every flaw magnified. It was exhausting. Sarah tried to shield Mark from the worst of it, knowing how much stress he carried from his job. But even she couldn't hide her growing frustration. Sitting at the kitchen table one evening, surrounded by stacks of HOA correspondence, she shook her head in disbelief. "This has gone too far," she said, her voice low but sharp. "They don't care about rules. They care about control. And they picked the wrong family to mess with." Mark looked at her, concern etched across his face. "What are you planning?" he asked cautiously. He trusted Sarah completely, but he also knew she wasn't someone to cross lightly. Whatever she had in mind, it wouldn't be pretty. She smiled faintly, a glimmer of resolve in her eyes. "Let's just say I'm done playing nice. If they want to fight, they're going to get one." It was a chilly evening when the knock came. Mark and Sarah had just finished dinner, the remnants of their meal still scattered across the dining table. The sound echoed through the quiet house, sharp and unexpected. Mark glanced at Sarah with a puzzled expression before rising to answer the door. When he opened it, he froze. Standing on their porch were two men dressed in uniforms that looked vaguely official. One wore a cap with a shiny badge pinned to it, while the other held a clipboard. Their expressions were stern, almost rehearsed, as if they'd practiced this moment beforehand. "Good evening," the taller of the two said, his voice clipped and authoritative. "We're here on behalf of the Homeowners Association. You've been served with an eviction notice." Mark blinked, his mind struggling to process what he just heard. Eviction. For a garden flag. Before he could respond, Sarah appeared behind him, her presence immediately commanding. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the men. Something about them didn't sit right with her. Perhaps it was the way their uniforms seemed slightly off, or how their body language lacked the confidence of real law enforcement officers. "What's going on?" Sarah asked firmly, her tone leaving no room for nonsense. The shorter man cleared his throat and held out a piece of paper. "This is an official notice," he said, avoiding direct eye contact. "You've violated multiple HOA regulations, and unless you vacate the property within 72 hours, legal action will be taken." Sarah didn't take the paper. Instead, she crossed her arms and tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "Legal action? From who? Show me your identification." The request caught them off guard. The taller man hesitated, glancing at his partner before replying. "Our credentials aren't relevant here. This is a formal matter." "That's where you're wrong," Sarah shot back, her voice steady but laced with authority. Years of commanding naval base security had taught her how to spot imposters, and these men were raising red flags left and right. Real police officers, or even legitimate representatives, would never refuse to show ID when asked. "If you're serving an eviction notice, I want proof of who you are and who sent you. Right now." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The men exchanged uneasy looks, their earlier bravado crumbling under Sarah's unyielding stare. They weren't prepared for someone like her, someone who wouldn't back down or accept their intimidation tactics without question. The shorter man fumbled with his clipboard, pretending to shuffle papers, while the taller one tried to regain control of the situation. "Look, Mom," he started, his tone harder now. "This isn't a negotiation. Either you comply, or there will be consequences." Sarah took a step closer, her height and demeanor making her seem even more imposing. "Let me make something clear," she said, her voice dropping to a level that sent chills down Mark's spine. "I don't know who you are or who sent you, but I do know this. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal offense. And trust me, you don't want to find out what happens next if you try to pull that stunt here." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Mark watched in awe as the men visibly wilted under her glare. Whatever bravado they'd walked in with was gone, replaced by nervous energy. The taller man muttered something about needing to confirm details and hastily retreated toward their car, his partner trailing close behind. Within seconds, they were speeding away, leaving the Thompsons standing on their porch in stunned silence. Mark turned to Sarah, his face a mix of admiration and disbelief. "Did that really just happen?" She nodded, her jaw tight. "Oh, it happened. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Her mind was already racing, piecing together the implications of what had just transpired. Whoever these men were, and whoever had sent them, they'd made a grave mistake. Sarah wasn't the type to let threats slide, especially not against her family. As she closed the door and locked it securely, she knew one thing for certain. The HOA had no idea who they were dealing with. After the fake cops fled, Sarah didn't waste a moment. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. On the other end was Commander Harris, an old colleague from the naval base who now worked closely with local law enforcement. "I need a favor," Sarah said without preamble, her voice calm but urgent. She explained what had just happened, the suspicious men, their eviction notice, and her suspicion that they were hired actors trying to intimidate her family. Commander Harris listened intently, his tone shifting from casual to serious as Sarah laid out the details. "You're right to be cautious," he said. "Impersonating law enforcement is no small thing. Let me look into this for you." While waiting for updates, Sarah turned her attention to the HOA itself. If these men had been sent by the board, there had to be a paper trail, contracts, payments, or emails linking them to the harassment campaign. Her years of managing high-stakes operations at the naval base gave her a sharp eye for detail and a knack for uncovering hidden connections. Sitting at her laptop, she began digging through public records, business filings, and online databases. Mark hovered nearby, watching in awe as his wife transformed into a one-woman investigative force. It didn't take long for pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. Through her research, Sarah discovered that the HOA had recently hired a private firm known for its aggressive tactics. The company specialized in resolving disputes between homeowner associations and problematic residents, a euphemism for bullying people into submission. They employed everything from late-night visits to forged documents, all designed to make targets feel powerless enough to leave voluntarily. What shocked Sarah most was how widespread this practice was. Dozens of similar cases popped up across the country, many involving families who simply couldn't afford to fight back. When Commander Harris called back later that evening, his news confirmed Sarah's suspicions. The uniforms those guys wore, fake. Their badges are counterfeit, and their so-called eviction notice has zero legal standing, he reported. I've already alerted local authorities. These guys won't get far if they try anything else. Armed with this information, Sarah felt a surge of determination. This wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about exposing the truth and holding the HOA accountable. She drafted a detailed email to the board members, attaching screenshots of her findings along with a stern warning. If you think hiring thugs to scare us will work, you're gravely mistaken. I'll see to it that every resident knows exactly what you've been doing. And if you come after my family again, expect consequences far worse than embarrassment. Mark watched as Sarah hit send, his admiration for his wife growing by the minute. Do you really think they'll back off now? He asked cautiously. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a faint smile playing on her lips. Not yet, but they will soon. People like them only understand power, and I'm about to show them exactly how much we have. Over the next few days, whispers spread throughout the neighborhood. Other homeowners started noticing strange activity around the Thompsons' house. Extra cars parked outside, deliveries arriving at odd hours. Some even saw Sarah speaking with uniformed officers near their front yard. It didn't take long for rumors to reach the ears of the HOA board. Panic set in as they realized their plan had backfired spectacularly. One evening, Mark found Sarah sitting quietly on the couch, staring at the garden flag through the window. What happens next? He asked softly. She turned to him, her expression resolute. We make sure nobody else gets treated like this. No matter how big or small the fight, justice always wins, if you're willing to stand your ground. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and Sarah walked into the community center with a folder tucked under her arm. She looked calm, almost relaxed, but those who knew her could see the steel in her eyes. Mark stayed close behind, holding their garden flag rolled up like a weapon, a silent reminder of everything they'd been through. The room buzzed with chatter as homeowners took their seats, some glancing nervously at Sarah, while others avoided her gaze altogether. Word had spread about the fake cops incident, and everyone seemed to sense that something big was about to happen. When the board members entered, they carried themselves with an air of false confidence. The head of the HOA, Mrs. Grayson, adjusted her glasses and called the meeting to order. Her voice wavered slightly as she scanned the crowd, perhaps noticing more attendees than usual. Normally, these meetings were sparsely attended, filled mostly with people eager to complain about overgrown hedges or noisy pets. But tonight, the room was packed, some out of curiosity, others out of solidarity for the Thompsons. Sarah waited patiently as routine matters were discussed. Landscaping budgets, holiday decorations, parking restrictions. Finally, it was time for open comments from residents. Without hesitation, Sarah stood up, drawing every eye in the room. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch, allowing tension to build. Then, with precision, she began. I'm here today because this organization has crossed a line, she said, her voice steady and clear. What started as minor disagreements over rules has escalated into harassment. And worse. She opened her folder and pulled out printed documents, holding them up for everyone to see. These papers prove that the HOA hired a private firm known for using intimidation tactics against homeowners. These same individuals impersonated law enforcement officers in an attempt to evict my family. Gasps rippled through the audience. Even the board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Mrs. Grayson tried to interject, stammering something about due process, but Sarah cut her off with a raised hand. Let me finish, she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. She went on to explain how the firm operated, citing examples from other neighborhoods where similar schemes had unraveled. She showed screenshots of contracts linking the HOA to the company, along with testimonies from former employees detailing their unethical practices. Every word landed like a hammer blow, dismantling the board's facade of authority piece by piece. Then came the final blow. Sarah revealed recordings of phone calls between Commander Harris and local law enforcement, confirming the illegality of the fake eviction notice. Impersonating police officers isn't just unethical, it's a crime, she stated, her gaze locking onto each board member in turn. And if you think I'm going to sit quietly while you destroy lives, you're sorely mistaken. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then one homeowner stood up. A middle-aged woman named Linda who lived 2 streets over. "I've been fined unfairly too," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. "They said my mailbox was too colorful and threatened to sue me if I didn't replace it." Another resident chimed in, then another, until the entire room erupted in stories of bullying, fines, and fear. People shared how they'd been pressured into compliance, too intimidated to fight back. For the first time, the HOA board found themselves outnumbered, not just by evidence, but by sheer numbers. Mrs. Grayson attempted to regain control, insisting that all actions were taken in accordance with guidelines. But her words fell flat. Sarah leaned forward, resting both hands on the table in front of her. "Guidelines? You call this guideline-abiding behavior?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "This is abuse of power, plain and simple. And trust me, I won't hesitate to take this to court if necessary." As the meeting drew to a close, it was clear the tide had turned. Homeowners left the room buzzing with newfound courage, exchanging contact information and planning next steps. The board members slunk away, their faces pale and defeated. For Sarah and Mark, it was only the beginning. But already, they could feel the winds of change blowing through their once oppressive neighborhood. In the days following the explosive HOA meeting, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. Residents who had once kept their heads down out of fear now gathered in driveways and parks, sharing stories and strategizing. Sarah became an unofficial leader of sorts, her calm yet commanding presence inspiring others to speak up. The garden flag outside the Thompsons' home, once a point of contention, had become a symbol of resistance. Neighbors began placing similar flags in their yards, not because they were required, but because they wanted to show solidarity. Meanwhile, the HOA board scrambled to contain the fallout. Mrs. Grayson called an emergency session behind closed doors, but whispers leaked out about heated arguments and finger-pointing among members. Some suggested issuing public apologies. Others argued for doubling down on enforcement to regain control. Their indecision only made them look weaker. Local news outlets caught wind of the scandal, sending reporters to interview residents. One headline read, *Suburban Nightmare. HOA bullying exposed by Navy Commander. Sarah didn't shy away from the attention. She gave interviews, always keeping her tone measured and factual. "This isn't about revenge," she told one reporter. "It's about accountability. Homeowners deserve transparency and fairness, not intimidation and lies." Her words resonated deeply, both locally and beyond. Social media lit up with support for the Thompsons, and soon, people from across the country were sharing their own horror stories of HOA abuse. Legal action came swiftly. Armed with irrefutable evidence, Sarah filed formal complaints against the HOA and the private firm they'd hired. Local authorities launched investigations into the fake eviction notice incident, questioning everyone involved. The stress showed on the faces of the board members, who suddenly seemed eager to avoid public appearances. Anonymous tips poured in, revealing even more questionable practices, like inflated budgets and secret meetings where fines were arbitrarily assigned. At the next scheduled HOA meeting, attendance was higher than ever. This time, however, the atmosphere felt different. Instead of fear, there was determination. Homeowners packed the room, united in their demand for change. When Mrs. Grayson took her seat at the head of the table, she looked visibly shaken. For the first time, she wasn't leading the discussion. She was defending herself. One by one, residents stood up to voice their grievances. A young couple recounted how they'd been fined for painting their front door a shade of blue deemed non-compliant. An elderly man described being threatened with foreclosure over unpaid fees he claimed he'd never received notices for. Each story added fuel to the fire, chipping away at whatever authority the board still clung to. When it was Sarah's turn to speak again, she didn't mince words. "You've lost the trust of this community," she said, addressing the board directly. "Your actions have caused real harm to families, to relationships, to lives. If you truly care about this neighborhood, you'll step down and let new leadership take over. Otherwise, we'll make sure you face every legal consequence available." Her ultimatum hung heavy in the air. After a long pause, Mrs. Grayson finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We will cooperate fully with the ongoing investigations, and effective immediately, all pending fines and disputes will be reviewed." The crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah remained focused. She knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Real change would take time, effort, and vigilance. Still, as she sat back down beside Mark, she allowed herself a small smile. They weren't just fighting for their own rights. They were paving the way for a brighter future for everyone. As the meeting concluded, neighbors lingered, exchanging hugs and handshakes. Someone joked about hosting a block party to celebrate, and the idea quickly gained traction. For the first time in years, the community felt alive, not stifled by rules, but united by shared purpose. Mark leaned over to Sarah and whispered, "You did it. You really did it." She shook her head gently. "Not me," she replied. "All of us." In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The HOA board resigned en masse, unable to withstand the mounting pressure from investigations and public outcry. A special election was held to choose new leadership, and for the first time in years, residents turned out in droves to vote. Sarah didn't run herself. She had no interest in politics, but she played a key role in vetting candidates who genuinely cared about fairness and transparency. When the results were announced, the newly elected board members included Linda, the woman who had spoken up at the fateful meeting, and a retired teacher named Mr. Patel, known for his calm demeanor and problem-solving skills. The changes were immediate and impactful. Outdated rules were rewritten with input from homeowners, creating guidelines that balanced aesthetics with practicality. Fines were capped at reasonable amounts, and disputes were resolved through open discussions rather than threats. Even the garden flag rule was scrapped entirely, much to Mark's delight. He joked that their little lighthouse flag might become the official symbol of the neighborhood's newfound freedom. The block party idea quickly gained momentum, turning into a full-blown community festival. Families gathered on the soccer field near the entrance, setting up tables laden with homemade dishes and desserts. Kids ran around playing games while adults mingled, laughing over shared stories of HOA absurdities past. Someone brought a karaoke machine, and by evening, off-key renditions of classic hits echoed through the air. Mark surprised everyone, including himself, by belting out a heartfelt rendition of Asterisk. "Stand by Me," dedicating it to Sarah. She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile as cheers erupted around them. For Sarah, the celebration wasn't just about victory, it was about healing. Many neighbors approached her throughout the day, thanking her not only for standing up to the HOA, but also for giving them courage to do the same. One elderly woman hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You saved us," she whispered. "We were so scared, but you showed us we didn't have to be." Mark watched his wife interact with their neighbors, pride swelling in his chest. He'd always admired her strength, but seeing her inspire an entire community left him awestruck. That night, as they sat together on their porch watching fireworks light up the sky, he reached for her hand. "Do you think this is what real peace feels like?" he asked softly. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the bursts of color above. "Maybe," she replied. "But it's not just peace, it's trust. We've built something here, something stronger than fear or control." Life settled into a rhythm far removed from the chaos of recent months. Neighbors looked out for each other, lending tools, sharing meals, and organizing regular events to keep the sense of camaraderie alive. The Thompsons' home remained their sanctuary, but now the entire neighborhood felt like an extension of it. The garden flag still fluttered proudly outside their door, a reminder of where it all began. One afternoon, as Sarah watered the plants in their front yard, a young boy rode his bike up to the curb. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thompson," he called shyly. "My mom says you're a hero." Sarah chuckled, crouching down to meet him at eye level. "Tell your mom I'm just someone who stood up when it mattered. Anyone can be a hero if they're willing to fight for what's right." The boy grinned before pedaling away, leaving Sarah smiling after him. As she stood there under the golden sunlight, she realized that sometimes the most meaningful battles aren't fought on distant shores or high-stakes missions. They happen right at home, in quiet suburbs where people simply want to live without fear. And though she never sought recognition, she knew she'd made a difference, not just for her family, but for everyone lucky enough to call this place home.